And good evening, everybody. Welcome to Astral Perceptions. This is a show dedicated to examining the outer fringes of our reality and bringing them to the forefront of our awareness. I'm your host, Mark Johnson, and I haven't done one of these in quite a while. I was taking some personal time off to, work on some things in my own life, and I was doing the Paranormal UK radio show. I've since stepped down from the PA UK radio show. Irene is going to be continuing the show with one of the other producers, Andy Mercer. And I wish them the best of luck. I wanted to change. This is not a weekly show. I'm going to try to do something bi-weekly, maybe every 2 to 3 weeks. But I want to do quality, and I want to go in a different direction than what we've been doing on the other show. This show I'm really dedicating to, I'm not even sure how to describe it. I want to say the spiritual, but it's not exactly the spiritual per se. It's looking at our reality, what we think is our reality, and trying to peel back the layers of what is really going on around us. Everything from our perception of time, our perception of the three-dimensional world, examining multiple dimensions, connecting with higher sources like our higher self, guides, spirit, the creator force, or God, if you will, and looking at it from different perspectives, and not so much to teach people or educate, but to present different viewpoints and to make people think, to help people raise their awareness and get away from this really negative three-dimensional world, because it's pretty bad what we've been dealing with here lately, these last several years. And I want to give us some hope, because we actually have more control than we think. I'm going to dedicate more future shows to that topic. But one thing that I didn't do, I promised to do in past shows, is have more guests. So tonight I want to welcome our first guest of the year to Astral Perceptions, Von Braschler. Von, welcome to the program.
Fine, thank you. Thanks for having me back.
Oh, yeah, it's wonderful having you back. We previously had you on, what was it, over a year or so ago? Talking about some of your other books, but you've had a couple of books come out since then. Before we get into the books, could you, for those people who may not be familiar with you, and because this is the new show, could you just tell everybody just a little bit about your background?
Yeah, I originally was a journalist. I still think of myself as a journalist. I like to interview people and get stories and do research and try to get, behind the glamour and excitement of what it is to the how and the why and the where, and it's like those are the deeper questions. So I started having encounters myself at a young age. And like a lot of people, I just kind of dismissed them, and I just went on my merry way. And finally I said, you know what? I think other people have these strange experiences too.
Well, you've written several books. I think when we had you last on, we had the Confessions of a Reluctant Ghost Hunter.
Yep, still reluctant. They're scary, man.
I may have mentioned this past. I mean, I've been a paranormal investigator for going on almost 20 years now. Although the last couple of years I've taken a back seat to it. I haven't really done as much because I've been refocusing my interests and research into exploring our reality and the true nature of our reality and the different things that go beyond our five senses. And this is why with your two books that have come out within the last year, the first one is Time Shifts, Experiences of Slipping into the Past and Future. And then the newest one that just came out in February, 7 Secrets of Time Travel, Mystic Voyages of the Energy Body.
Well, actually, that came out a little earlier.
Oh, that's 2012. Oh, I apologize.
I did a couple of books on consciousness. One was manifesting using thought forms to visualize real change, and the newest one is mysterious messages from beyond, which looks at thought form messages that we receive in many ways, otherwise known as spirit communications, sometimes known as telepathy. But go ahead. I'm with you totally. It's the question of how to get beyond those five senses that interest me too.
Well, let's talk a little bit about time shifts. Time shifts I find to be a very fascinating subject because there are a lot of anecdotal stories of time shifts out there. I was reading your book, and a couple of the stories I had heard before, others I haven't, and also I know people who have had certain time shifts. In fact, I think a lot of what some people refer to as seeing a ghost, seeing an apparition, may be more in line with having a time shift experience rather than seeing the spirit of a deceased person.
Yes, I've reached the same conclusion as you. I think that many times, if you consider the ritualistic patterns that the ghosts exhibit, I used to say that all ghosts are ritualistic. I think all ghosts are like appearing to us out of the past when their point on the timeline and our point on the timeline, for some reason, probably because of an energy vortex or an anomaly, converge. And then for a moment, there we are. It's like we're sharing the same screen.
I've mentioned this story before on the other show with my co-host Irene, who has told the story many times of looking at a house in London that her and her husband were thinking of buying, and she went upstairs by herself, walked into one of the bedrooms, and then saw a woman standing there in period maid servant's clothing, like from the early 20th century. And what was interesting about that was she looked at the woman looked at her, and both of their jaws dropped open because they saw each other and were shocked. And then the woman disappeared.
Yeah.
And I always felt that because of the woman, the way she reacted. Now, too many paranormal investigators will jump to the conclusion that, it's ghost of a servant. She didn't know she died, and now she's still reliving her job, and blah, and I don't buy that anymore. I really think what we're looking at, it was a time slip where the conditions just happened to be right. Two very much living, breathing human beings happened to see each other, but whatever conditions were right, saw each other through time.
Yes, if you think that there's one timeline, right, and it is curved, and it bends back on us, so that the future that we think of as the future, and what we consider the past, and what we consider the here and now, are all simultaneously occurring, but on different points on the timeline. And then if we think of how time really moves, this is the whole new gravitational wave theory, it moves in waves. So the waves come this direction, they go that direction. I think that there are certain times and places on the earth where it all converges. And then that explains many things. It explains anomalies that will appear to us as though out of the past. It also explains odd things that seem to be futuristic, and then they're here and then they're gone. They appear in front of our eyes and then they're gone. It could even explain many things like ETs, Bigfoot. I mean, I think there are many possibilities that could be explained away by what we commonly call time shifts or time slips.
It's not only time slips, but I look at it, there's a couple of different concepts going on here that are very related. One of them is the concept that all time is happening at once. It's only our view of linear time is an illusion. It's the way our brains process time. But in the spirit world, or when you get out of the physical three-dimensional reality and you start, or you're able to perceive these other dimensions, you see that time is all happening at once. And so that's another reason why people are able to have these experiences. Plus, you're dealing with multiple dimensions, and the rules may be different. Dr. Michio Kaku has mentioned many times over the years about with string theory that there's the idea of at least 11 different dimensions, which I feel is a lot more than that, and that the fact that time is an illusion.
Oh, yes. I totally agree. And there are probably so many more dimensions that we can't conceive of because we operate in so few. So, it's like we're not like, it's like going to France and trying to speak to them in German. It's like they're not going to get it. Ouspensky said, P.D. Ouspensky, it's like you're living inside a box. You have no idea what's outside the box. Well, we're all boxed in because we live in physical dimensions that are very restraining, and as long as that happens, we're not going to see beyond it. Now, if you go beyond the physical realm, now you're going to have to go beyond your physicality. Now we're talking about, the spirit realm, of course. In the spirit realm, the laws of physics, laws that govern our physical world and our existence simply don't exist. So all bets are off.
And when we say the spirit realm, I think we should clarify that. We talk about the spirit realm as if it's like one plane of existence,
right,
just beyond ours, when in fact there are probably multiple planes of existences going beyond. Like when a person dies, their soul or spirit moves over into one plane of existence, what we would think of as a spirit world, but then there are other levels above that, or even below it, and even below ours, that where we can travel and learn, because this is a teaching journey.
Yes, and they're not alien to us. These various levels correspond to different subtle energy levels of our body, or subtle aspects of ourself. The mental plane, the emotional plane. The emotional plane would, for instance, be the astral plane. There's the causal plane, the Buddhic plane. There are many planes, and in many traditions, like the Hindu, for instance, they've thought of, like 7 levels of heaven, if you will. There are seven subtle bodies, 7 energy bodies, which correspond to 7 planes of existence. So the very fact that we have and have been known to exhibit, in terms of, the energy output on us, subtle energy bodies would indicate that we have a connection to these different planes. So we're not exactly alien or out of our element in these places. It's just that most people have not learned to tap their subtle energy bodies.
You mentioned something that just made me think of something. You talked about 7 different energy bodies.
Yeah.
It's interesting that seems to correlate to the 7 chakras.
7 chakras, the 7 planes, the 7 colors, the 7 diatonic notes. I mean, there are many ways. The 7 rays. I think it all comes from the 7 rays. There are many ways to look at this, and yet when you say, well, there are only 7 colors in the rainbow, there are only 7 chakras, I think it's just that we only perceive of 7. I think, as you do, that there are many, many ways to do this. We've just begun to understand there could be 7 chakras, 7 colors, 7 planes, 7 subtle bodies. But we know that there are multiple bodies. So if there are multiple bodies, then there are multiple realities. There are multiple dimensions. There are multiple realities. I'm very sorry. Multiple worlds. I did turn off my phone. It just
It happens to both of us.
It's a new phone, and it does what it does.
It happens.
God bless the people at Motorola. They do take care of me. But the LG people said, goodbye. It's like, hello, I'm using your phone. Goodbye. So, yeah, so we're Motorola bound. But anyway, yeah, there are many levels of reality for us to explore. It's as though we're bobbing on a vast ocean, sitting on one corner, on one end of a vast iceberg with no concept of what's below us or on the other side of the iceberg or on top of the iceberg or that we can see on the ocean beyond the iceberg that blocks our view. You know, it's we're just bobbing corks on top of the ocean. And I think that most people haven't even a clue. I shouldn't be so cruel. Most people, they only live in a physical realm. So they can't conceive of anything beyond the physical realm. But, we are limited by our five senses. We're limited by our linear perception of everything, including time, and we're limited by a material view of the world, material reductionist view of reality. There's much more than that. And the sooner people explore that and come to realize it, the more they'll open up to greater awareness of their being.
And that is the problem that we have, especially in Western society, and where we're taught from a very early age, this is the way the world works. Everything's, if it can't be proved by the scientific method, it doesn't exist. And, we're conditioned. And even when people start having experiences, they'll blow them off. They'll make excuses. They think it's your imagination. I was watching. There's a new Ricky Gervais special on Netflix. I've always liked Ricky Gervais. He's funny, but he's an stout atheist, and he was making fun of the ghost shows and how he doesn't believe in any of that. And I'm sitting there going, Ricky, I bet if you really thought hard, you could think back on certain aspects of your life where strange things happened that you just blew it off. And I think that's what happens with most people. They're trained either through religious reasons, cultural reasons, to just ignore these things that are happening, which if they really think about it, can go all the way back to childhood.
Amen, brother. No, I think this is exactly true. And it was true in my case. As a young person, I had experiences that I couldn't analyze. I couldn't begin to understand. It seemed ludicrous what had happened to me. Losing time, moving in space instantly, and like a lot of people, I just said, you just keep your mouth shut. It never happened. It's a weird thing. Just be happy you're safe. And then some people will say, oh, an angel picked me up and carried me 20 miles in an instant. Well, sure. I mean, maybe. But I never met the angel. I should, who was that masked man? I should have thanked the angel. You think you'd remember an angel doing that. It just, boom, happened. And what happens at a time shift or time travel is very often it's so disconcerting that it happens instantly. And you have no frame of reference or way to analyze in the course of your memory what we store in our brain as our memory. No way to analyze and make sense of it. So we just say, oh, that was strange, and we don't talk about it for fear of being ostracized. We don't want to think about it because it just gives us a headache, and we just move on. And this happens all the time. It happens when people see, well, I've seen spaceships, but it's like, it doesn't really impact my life. So I say it's not part of my frame of reference. So it's not part of my world. And I just move on, And I know this isn't a show about them. That's another show. But I say, well, that's the way people are. If you can't get a handle on it and put a label on it, you just say, well, isn't that strange? I must be mistaken. Or, I must have daydreamed it, or it must have been a vision, or it must have been purely out of my imagination. And this happens over and over and over again to people.
Well, even those people, and, we could touch the fringes of the ufology subject, those people who have had those experiences and with the missing time, or even more so, where it feels like something happens to them, feels like they're gone for hours, but when they come back, no time has passed.
Exactly. And this is what I've noticed happens very often in time shifts, that they'll happen so suddenly and abruptly and without any kind of explanation that you do lose an amount of time, but you can't explain. Or it seems like you were gone a long time, and it really was just an instant. In other words, there's a time distortion.
Time, and again, when people are pulled into those types of experiences, I believe they are pulled into an alternate reality, another dimension, whether it's on an astral level or whether they're able to manipulate the reality to bring people into these different realms and then bring them back. Some of these other cases that you've mentioned in the book, the one that I had heard before is the family and the husband and wife in the car, and they're driving along and come across this town. They keep trying to drive away, and then every few miles they come back into the exact same town, even though they seem to be going straight, to the point where it's frightened them so badly. But there's no real explanation for it.
This story has happened to a lot of people, and you can just pick your name and pick your setting. I was telling this story in media in Australia. And this woman contacts me afterwards and says, well, this happened to my girlfriend and I. We were driving in the car, and this happened to us, And I said, well, what did you do? And they said, we didn't say a darn thing because we talked about it, and we compared notes, and we figured nobody would believe us, and we couldn't believe our own eyes. So we just kept quiet. They said, people would think we're crazy.
And that's something that is people have done for years, especially in the 20th century, where you did not talk about these types of things, not until the latter part of the 20th century. But in my parents' generation or the generation before that, something happened, you didn't talk about it because people would make fun of you or call you crazy, and some people would even wind up in a psych ward.
Well, and then, we try to put a psychological handle on it. We say, well, this was a deja vu moment, right? Or this was a deja vu experience. Or I must have, I must have met this person somewhere along the line. I don't know where, but I must have met this person before today. And yet I know this person. Or, you stumble upon a scene, you say, I've been here before. I can't explain where. And I would say this, search your memory. If it's not within your frame of reference, if there's no memory stored in your mind that will enable you to analyze it, then just maybe it is an actual, experience that you've had, out of body.
Could be. I had a dream once, which I thought was a dream, but except the fact that now I still remember it 40 years later in high school, where I dreamed I was out in my backyard and somebody was with me, and I knew I was out of my body. And I'm sitting there going, wow, hey, this is what it's like being a ghost. This is awesome. And the lighting was really strange. It was dead of night, yet I could see everything as bright as day. And it had a green tint to it, like looking through night vision goggles. And it only lasted a few minutes, but when I came out of it, I felt my body felt electrified, and I felt like I was walking on air for 3 days.
Wow. Yeah, I really believe in using lucid dreaming as a programmed effort in dream work to explore a world beyond yours, because there you go. Your consciousness is leaving your body. You're no longer limited by time and space. You can move freely, in other realms, in other worlds, in other planes, in other realities. And in my own experience, I've had a lot of lucid dreams that I revisit. That not the same dream, but a continuation of that setting, as though I'm actually going to this other world, like my own little, journey to Oz. And I'm there, and I see people there, people that I don't know in this physical world. But here's the interesting thing, it's taken me years to figure out. Occasionally, I'll bump into these people on the street in the physical form, physical reality. And I remember them from my dreams. And sometimes they remember me from the dreams. So I think we do move around, also in our dreams.
In our dream state, I really believe a lot of times in dream, you're in that theta state. I believe it's where you are dreaming and your brain is processing things through the day. And
yes,
I'll have my dreams about work, anxiety dreams, and those are dreams. But then there's the ones that are special, that stick with you, where I've had dreams where I'm either floating or flying.
Yep.
And while the scenario of the dream seems dreamlike, I still feel that sensation. Like I can jump off the ground and float 30 feet up in the air above my house. And those dreams stick with me again. Years later, they're still there, unlike a standard dream.
I mean, these are lucid, vivid dreams. They're often in color. They're vivid. They're insightful. They have great impact to you. They stick with you. And yes, most of us will have these anxiety dreams. They are the efforts of a restless mind that's not totally asleep during our rest period, and they are trying to process and yet trying to analyze unresolved questions and concerns we have about yesterday and worries about tomorrow. And they keep playing these scenarios over and over. Well, these are really average, kind of dull, kind of like reruns of your memory. These are not what we're talking about here. We're talking about lucid dreams that are really vivid and colorful, and in which you're not sitting and talking and riding in a car with your friends. You're flying through the sky. This is outside the body. These are dreams of spirit.
And I've had several of those in my life. Not lately, though, which irritates me because I'm just going to say it outright. I freaking love flying in my dreams. It's such a liberating feeling. And again, I always feel energized with them. But it's been a while, so hopefully I can work on that. But again, it's in those types of situations. Would you call it? It's a form of astral projection or out of body experience, or does the terminology not really matter?
The common question, it is like astral projection, but in astral projection, by definition, you're actually moving in your astral body, which would be your emotional body, which is actually, your conscious energy body that relates to your emotional well-being. You're moving in your astral body in an astral plane, which is, of course, where it's happiest. This is just one aspect. So a full-on out-of-body experience could be where you take many more levels of your conscious self, your many more levels of your emotional energy bodies. You're taking with you your mental body, your causal body, your buddhic body. So you go all the way up to your higher spiritual bodies and taking them with you. And then you can go various places, various realms, various levels of planes of existence, and have if you will, a multidimensional experience. This is similar to astral projection, but much more layered.
When we talked about time slips, now a lot of cases people will have a personal experience. You mentioned, but the ones that really interest me are the ones of shared experiences, like the couple in the car, like the women in Versailles. There's another one I don't know if you're familiar with, Terry Lovelace, who wrote a book, Incident at Devil's Den, which in general was about a UFO abduction experience he had. But he wrote a sequel that delved more into his life, which showed that he was having weird experiences all of his life. And one incident he mentioned, you mentioned earlier a story about somebody who feels like they were picked up by an angel and flown a great distance in a short amount of time.
Right.
He had an experience where he was with some friends or somewhere out in the woods, and he decided to walk home. And all of a sudden, he's walking down these railroad tracks, and then the next thing he knows, he's on his front porch. Well, then he realized in hindsight how strange the whole thing was. First of all, I don't think there were railroad tracks near his location, and he lived like 10, 15 miles away, and it only took minutes.
That was my experience as a 12-year-old boy.
Oh, really? What happened?
Exactly the same dang thing. Okay, so, I'll just tell it exactly the way I remember it, and not the way I tried to suppress it, but the way it happened. I was like 11 or 12, and in our neighborhood, there would be an old yellow school bus that says berry pickers wanted on the side, and the kids in my neighborhood said, "Let's go pick berries." I said, "I don't pick berries." And he said, "Well, you don't have to trim in, you can just eat them." And he said, "Well, I don't know." They said, "And there's a swimming hole by the river, so you can pick the berries and go swimming all day, and then we'll just get a ride home." I said, "Well, that sounds great." So that's what we did for a few days, except one day I was at the river and I got really, really sick when all the other kids were eating berries or picking berries. I was sitting there with a very sick stomach, and I thought, oh, this isn't just eating too many berries. This is something quite awful. And I couldn't get them to drive me home. It's like, well, there's just one bus, and we wait till everybody gets on the bus, and I'll take you home. It's a long drive. I said, I'm not going to make it. So I started walking on railroad tracks, because the railroad track went right by the field. We passed it every day. My friend said, "You don't know where this railroad track goes." And I said, "It'll take me right to my house, right to my house." And they said, "You don't know that, And I said, "Oh, sure." So I started walking, and I remember I got to a bend in the road, and I turned around, and there they were saying, come back, you're going to get lost." And then I continued on. I took one more. I rounded the bend to where they couldn't see me, and then I took one more step, and everything went black. And then the next instant, I was in front of my house, which must have been 20 miles away, and I didn't know how to get to my house. I didn't know exactly the route of that particular railroad track, but there I was in front of my house, and I remember how high the railroad track was, and I stepped down from the railroad track, went in the front door, flopped on my mother's bed, and yelled, "Help me, I'm really sick." And she called, and I was very soon at the hospital, and not any too soon because my appendix had burst. I couldn't have waited any longer, and they caught it just in time. And it was a year later that I was playing in the backyard, and I didn't tell anybody how I got home. I just was happy to be home. I couldn't make any sense of it, so I didn't describe it or think about it. And I hear this funny music, and the music, this is the other thing, hearing music. So I'm hearing music in my head, and I'm thinking it sounds just like the radio, but it's inside my head. And there would be a song, and then there would be another song. And I started wandering around looking for, what is this? Where is this? But it seems like it's inside my head. I go out in the front yard, and I look out at the front street, and suddenly, a year later, it hits me like a ton of bricks. There's no railroad track in front of my house. Never has been. Never has been. No railroad track anywhere near my house. So how did I get home? So 2 years later, we moved north of there. And what do you think crosses in front of our road every day? It's a big railroad track, high up, high up. So it's like that, you know. We can move quickly through space and time, but it's very hard to resolve what's happening, you know, because it's so disconcerting for people. We don't exactly know the conditions in which this happens.
Plus, it seems that in an incident like yours, there was almost some type of intervention because your appendix had burst and you were so far from home. And if you had not gotten home when you did, you may not have made it.
Yes. I think there was some intervention. I think there was some assistance, but I would, you know, the one part of the story that I shouldn't have left out was when I found myself in front of my house instantly, miles from the berry field. It was later in the day, and yet I couldn't relate to any time elapsing. I didn't experience any time lapsing. It was just suddenly turning dark. I thought that was very strange.
Now, with some of these time slips, when a single person experiences it, I can almost understand it in that maybe it's something that happens, whether it's a form of astral perception or an altered state of consciousness, which allows one to view these different levels of time and space. But I'm interested in when it happens to multiple people at once. Yeah. And, you know, it's not that both one or more parties all fall into a trance. There seems to be some other type of force at work. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it has something to do with possibly the weather, but I would say an energy anomaly. You know, there could be an energy grid or a time portal. You know, you think of like the Bermuda Triangle. There's certain places in the earth, like where I live. I live on an island in the southeast corner near my house. Is a place where your compass will not work on your boat. You know, it is a strange place. The compasses go wild. So I think there's some magnetic grids or electromagnetic anomalies in the earth. I think it could be related to storms as well. You think about that, and it's like, you know, a lot of stories involving planes and storms. You know, I think of the boys in what was it, Edinburgh in Scotland. They went on an orienteering trip, and this was later written up in a magazine and studied extensively. But these were naval cadets who were set out in the woods with a task of finding the village of Kersey in Suffolk. And these naval cadets, they had a map, and they were going to see how well they could orienteer in the woods. Well, they noticed there was strange weather when they entered the village. but the village wasn't exactly what they expected to find. It was a strange medieval setting, and the windows were all painted with whitewash, and the furniture was all removed. There were no people. When they first came, there was smoke rising from the chimney of a building, and then that disappeared. There was a breeze when they first came in, and then that subsided. There were ducks in a pond, but then there were no ducks in a pond. There was, after they first entered the village, all these sounds began to become silent, and they couldn't find any people or animals or sounds of birds. And they wandered around. They found no answers. They were feeling very strange about this. So they left, and they reported that they had found the village of Kersey. And when they described it, their scoutmaster was very upset. And they said, that's ridiculous. You've described a medieval village. Well, it was written up in a book called Adventures in Time, studied extensively by the Psychic Research Society in England, and this happened to them in 1957. They were interviewed by researchers in the 80s. The book came out in 1997. The boys never changed their story. Every one of them stuck to it. And finally, research by an Andrew Mackenzie, who was one of the researchers, revealed that their description was spot on to an Anglo-Saxon village that had been virtually wiped out during the Black Plague in the 14th century. They described bridges and shops that were known to exist centuries ago but no longer exist. They had heard a bell when they first entered the town, and then when they left the town, they heard the bell. But no other time did they hear the bell. And they determined that at the time of the Black Plague, they were building a church, and it had not been completed. So, there you have confirmation of many, many people, many different people who were out to find something called a village called Kersey, and they found one. But it was out of time and out of place. Not out of place, it was exactly where Kersey was on their map, but certainly an earlier version of Kersey.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I've really become fascinated with these last few years, and where I've been redirecting some of my research, are in these hotspot areas. You mentioned the Bermuda Triangle, or even the island where you're living with the high magnetic field. Yeah. There are, where I live here in northern New Jersey, there are several locations where there is a high amount of, I'll call it high strangeness, because it's not just one single phenomenon. It started off as a ghost investigation. There's a town not far from me called Bloomingdale, where there were two houses on the same street, both having paranormal activity. So we investigated it, and the homeowners were great with us, and they allowed us to come back multiple times. Well, the more we researched it, and I wasn't as familiar with this topic back then, I was like everybody else, traditional view of ghosts, but started to realize it wasn't ghosts. It had something to do with the land. And that, there was multiple phenomenon going on there, including some type of interdimensional elemental types of phenomenon, and an intelligence. Now, I can point out there's this show that's on right now on the History Channel that I'm really loving at the moment, called The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch. Now, a lot of people have heard of Skinwalker Ranch from the Bigelow era back in the 90s, the books, and now they've got this television show. And the ranch itself has exhibited such strange phenomenon. And if you take aside the whole UFO phenomenon that people associate with it, and look at the scientific approach they've taken with using spectrum analyzers, monitoring the electromagnetic frequencies on the ranch, finding pinpoints of areas like a spot a mile high above the ranch that seems to be a focal point of this energy. They get hit with gamma ray radiation, massive amounts of it, to the point where they got radiation burns on their hands and face. Mm-hmm. So that is definitely a hot spot. But there are a lot of other hot spots, not as intense, but all over the country, all over the world. Mm-hmm. And again, most people don't even think about it, and unless you happen to be one of those people living in the area, and then you start having your own experiences.
Well, I think that's exactly what it is. It all boils down to electromagnetic energy. You know, whether it's a storm or whether it's a location, there's going to be an anomaly in the energy field. And I mean, I lived on Mount Hood in Oregon, and I had some very strange encounters up there. And it was everything from people in the past that would just pop in, to things that would just appear out of nowhere, to like elementals. Definitely elementals, to woodland spirits. Mm-hmm. You know, I had a neighbor up there who wrote children's stories under an assumed name. I think it was Omar, and Omarr, I think. Trying to jog my memory. But I said, why did you pick the name Omar? He said, oh, that's who tells me the stories. And he said, sit down on this log, and I'll tell you the story of Omar. He tells me one day he met a tree in the woods, and the tree started speaking to him. I said, really? I said, well, you know, that sounds silly. He says, but he's told me several excellent stories, and the children do like them. And I said, well, so where is Omar? He said, you're sitting on him. He says he's still alive. Now he's a log, but he's here. So, I mean, I went out in the woods, and I didn't see anybody like Omar's relatives, but there was now the woods where we were was very interesting. It was near where the Warm Spring Indians were, and it had some very beautiful woods called Brightwood, which is where I lived, in the middle of this dense forest by the river, by Salmon River, was these bright woods. And the Warm Spring Indians historically would come there in the summer because they said the woods were not only beautiful, but enchanted. So I believe that must be true, because, I mean, when I was in the woods, an Indian just popped in front of me, and he was like very tall. He was in full costume, and he had paint on. He was, you know, ceremonially decorated, and he had feathers, and he looked like he was quite an interesting fellow. He just popped in, and we were startled to see each other, you know. It's like I went, oh, and he went, oh, and I said, you don't belong here. And he went, and then he was gone, you know, and it's like, well, I mean, I know that shamans, you know, go into deep trances, and they would have experience outside time and space. You know, they would visit the ancestors, go forward in the future, and see what the future holds. So this, you know, I thought, well, that's just, you know, an Indian from maybe the past popping in, you know. But then, you know, also we were located near the Barlow Trail of Oregon, which was one of the five main routes that the settlers and the westward movement took in going to Oregon. The last trail, which cut 2 or 3 days off their sojourn, was called the Barlow Trail. And the road in front of my house, and I was like one of a few cabins in the middle of the woods there, was called the Old Barlow Trail, because it was the Old Barlow Trail. It became known as the Barlow Road. I think now it's called the Barlow State Highway. But it, you know, on a certain time of day, at a certain time of year, and I found this to be true in the stories I've researched, very often it's like late summer, early fall. It'll be like at dusk. It'll be a certain time of the year, a certain time of the day. Boom. things pop in and things pop out. It's like it's like there's an energy vortex or something. Because I would see like fading visions, almost like heat waves coming off the old road, which was now paved, the Barlow Trail Road, of settlers that would be like with their big wagons and their team, and they would be so tired and so dirty and so gaunt, and they would like collapse against, sit down on the ground against their wagons. And I would stare at them, and then they'd just disappear. And so I thought, So one day I talked to a neighbor who had been there a little longer than me. It wasn't Mr. Omar, it was another person. And I said, well, sometimes on a nice summer night, toward the end of the day, I can almost see on the old Barlow Trail settlers coming down and with their wagons. And he said, well, I've seen them too. I was just kind of like making a vague reference to, they're out there, And he's saying, oh, they're out there, So I know that in going to town to the bottom of the mountain, I would sometimes see old farmers coming out of a barn, wearing very old clothes, like from 100 years earlier, like old pioneers, and carrying very crude pitchforks, like homemade shovels and rakes and size. Obviously, antique implements they used in the field. And they would all file out, single file, all dressed in dark clothing. And they go out into the field, and then they just disappear. And I mentioned that to a lady once in town. We were sitting at the counter having lunch, and I said, sometimes at the end of the day, I could almost swear I see, old, pioneers coming out of the barn, She said, oh, yeah, I seen them. She said, you mean the barn at the edge of town? I said, yeah, that's the barn. Oh, yeah. So I think not everybody sees and not everybody hears. Not everybody has these experiences. But some people have found a way to bridge the gap. And I think that's the key to all this, because I think we all need to learn to bridge the gap. And I think what it is, it boils down to, once again, electromagnetic energy. I think that there dwells deep within us a consciousness, a human consciousness that is energy. It is intelligent energy. And we need to learn to tap this consciousness, this intelligent energy, in order to hear and see things that are not so very physically obvious.
Well, you mentioned something a few minutes ago about things happening at certain times of the year, at certain times of the day, which makes me wonder, with the Earth traveling through space and making the journey around the sun, could it be that when the Earth is in a specific position, that it's more susceptible to certain types of electromagnetic energies that allow these time slips to happen in these high energy areas, like your island and other locations? So when people see these types of things year after year, because again, if time itself, if there is no time, why would things reoccur at the exact same time of day and at maybe exact same times of year, unless, of course, it has to do with maybe the Earth going around the sun and hitting a specific spot in space that is enhancing or causing these certain areas to be more active.
Yeah, I think astrology touches on this. I'm not an astrologer by a long shot, but I think there's something to the fact that the planets do have a pull on us, and that once again, it's magnetism, right? So I'm reminded of a book that a friend of mine, Frank Joseph, wrote about dolphins. what he discovered was dolphins will migrate to a point in the ocean each year, which would be like at the same time every year, and it corresponds to the proximity of, as I recall, Sirius, the dog star, and there probably are many influences upon us which would seem to be physical, but really more are in the area of electromagnetic energy.
It's fascinating subject. I mean, I've never had a time slip experience myself, but I've experienced these locations which have this strange type of energy. And it's something that I'm continuing to research as I move forward, because I'm trying to learn a little bit more about it, trying to meditate and try to reach those states where I could, connect through lucid dreaming or an out-of-body experience, astral travel. So, it's just a fascinating subject, and it just shows that our three-dimensional physical reality isn't as real as we think it is. I mean, even if people would listen to science, they talk about when you start getting down to the subatomic level, it's all energy and space in between. So nothing
it's all energy.
Yeah, nothing is.
So I mean, if you think of one of the greatest scientists of all, that would be Albert Einstein. He spoke of the limitations and the defining factor of one's personal subjective perception of something as defining what is your reality. It's, and how it will vary from everybody based on their own experience, where they're located and their experience. So in researching consciousness in terms of like thought form projection, recently for the book Mysterious Messages from Beyond, I thought, well, what do religious people think about this? And I was thinking about Hindus or Buddhists or shamans. I was thinking of what do born again Christians think about this. So I lug out my Bible. People always want to quote the Bible to me. Like, I've got one. I can look it up. So I went through the Old Testament. I went through the New Testament, and I think there were 35 references I found in the Old and New Testament, which of course it takes in the Jewish Bible as well in the Old Testament, where basically it's saying the same thing. Like in Matthew, it says it so up front: you have ears, yet you hear not. You have eyes, yet you see not. And I'm thinking to myself, there are clues out there to anybody who can read and pay attention. We have to develop a new way of hearing and a new way of seeing.
And a lot of that, I think, has to do with being able to break free and open our minds to the possibilities that are out there and being more open, because I think, again, being at a very young age and you have society putting their ideas and norms, cultural norms on you so that you conform with our society moving forward. Yet when you look at a lot of these Aboriginal societies or Native societies, Native Americans, were very, very spiritual, and these types of things were an everyday occurrence to them. It was natural. They were able to pick up on these areas in the woods and in certain locations, places that were sacred to them for various reasons, but they knew that there was the energy in those areas, whereas Westerners, we plod along clueless and think, hey, there's gold in them there hills.
We should have paid attention. We said, these are sacred lands.
Mm-hmm.
They are. It's power. The power spots. A lot of the power spots or sacred sites in the earth are on Native American lands, and I think that's true. Like in many parts of the world, in like New Zealand, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
So I agree with you.
And it's I had a point there I was going to make, and now I forgot it. Oh, well, on to the next. Yeah, plus religion, I think, has a lot to do with it too. When you have people, and I'm not putting down anybody's religious beliefs, but if you look at Christianity as an example for Western religion, they have a very strict belief system, and some denominations more strict than others, and they don't want to hear about it. They don't want to think about it, or they automatically assume something is from God or the devil, and they don't want to open up to the idea that, hey, maybe reality is a lot stranger and more wonderful than we realize. But it's all a part of creation.
Oh, yes. Exactly. I mean, the Native Americans, many Aboriginals have known this for years, that we're all interrelated. We're all, interdependent. We're all in this together. It's the harmony of life, and we're not just like little material creatures, eating Fritos on the couch.
Although I do love Fritos.
Yes, aren't they good?
They're bad. They're so bad for you, but I love them. I'm a salt.
But a lot of religion is a lot of religion. The exoteric aspect of all religion is cultural, and that's good, and sometimes it's not so good, and it's like it carries a lot of the tradition and norms and values of that tradition, culturally. But then there's an esoteric side of every religion. And if you look at them, you'll see that there's a shared value in all human religions, that there's an esoteric core that understands a more mystic level of reality, which means explore the spirit within you. The spirit within you is not just your spirit. It is connected to all other spirit. And so I think people need to learn to look within and to untap their human potential.
I completely agree. And I think if we as a society started moving in that direction, I think we'd see a lot of the problems that we're currently experiencing in our society start to diminish, because when we start to realize that there is so much more out there, that if we become in tune with it, raise our own vibrations, get out of the negativity that we're currently living in, we can start to experience these things, and it would be very transformative. Now,
yeah, we tend to think in such limited terms, like limited resources, the end of everything, and the scarcity and who gets what, is anyone's short definition of politics, who gets what or who says what, but really, I mean, when you think about it, we're all in this together, and I think people just need to go within to find their inner being, and they're going to find a whole new level of understanding and realms and realities that most people will never ever encounter.
Absolutely, I agree with you 1,000%. Now, speaking of other realities, your new book that just came out, Mysterious Messages from Beyond. Now, I haven't had a chance to read this one yet, but being that I've worked as a paranormal investigator, one of the more fascinating aspects of investigation was capturing what we've referred to as EVP, which would be disembodied voices on recorders, some of them gibberish, some of them answering questions intelligently. And so I'm curious from your perspective, what other types of messages from beyond were you exploring in your book?
Well, I was interested in a lot of telephone messages, and I interviewed one family on the West Coast that I've known for years, and it was the case where the brother had died, and he kept calling his sister, and they never got along from day one as children, had terrible names for each other. And she would get home and she would play her voicemail, at home. And it would be her brother screaming at her and calling her these childish names that she hadn't heard for years, and played the tape for her husband, who was actually a journalist. And he hauls out his computer and puts it into a Word document, word for word. He records the message, what it sounds like my brother-in-law, and what he said and when he said it. And then they play the tape for her two daughters, her old, adult daughters. And they say, "Who's that?" And said, "Oh, that's our uncle, but that can't be. He's dead." So everybody seemed to agree who it was. And all these messages seemed to be coming when she was gone, and they would be on the recording. So it was a recording that various people could listen to and authenticate. And so then I think then the decision was made with the body of her brother to have it cremated. He's out of state. And so at this point, I was a little bit involved because I knew them. I said, "Yeah, you probably should have him cremated." So, so they had him cremated, and she gets the last call. She gets home and she plays the recording and the voicemail, and he's yelling, "I'm burning, I'm burning." And then after the cremation on that very day, at that very time, the phone messages stop. The odd part is the message disappeared. Into your question about recording the voices of ghosts. So the message disappears, and they can't understand how it disappeared because they didn't erase it. He said, "Did you erase it?" "No, I didn't erase it. Nobody erased it." So he said, "Well, I'm going to authenticate we got it." So the journalist's husband contacts the phone service, and they have no record of having received calls at that time. So I think it's that they let you hear what they want you to hear when they want you to hear it, and then it all goes away. I know that's true of spirit photography. Sometimes there'll be spirits appear in film, and then they disappear off the film. And I can't explain that, except that they seem to be able to control this. My own explanation is that it's thought form transfer. It's the thought form projection. It's electromagnetic energy, which they're using to project a thought form to you. So I think the capper of this is that two people can go into a room and they see, one hears a ghost and one doesn't hear a ghost. One sees a ghost, the other doesn't see a ghost. So they seem to be able to manipulate who gets the message, which of course is part of becoming a good messenger, is projecting a message.
I also think that it's the individuals themselves, depending on their level of openness. If they're closed off psychically, they won't see or hear things. It's like children are so much more open and acceptable in having these experiences, when they have their imaginary friends. There's been so many stories where, it turns out it's not imaginary. There's something there interacting with them. They're able to see grandma sitting in the rocking chair when nobody else can see her. But they haven't had it. They haven't been conditioned or had that,
that's right,
broken out of them as they get older. Now, and I think again, in some cases, with some people seeing things and others not, it might be just their own level of development as well. Now I've heard and seen, mostly heard, disembodied voices, whistles. Whistles always fascinate me.
Oh yeah.
Like a long, just out of nowhere. I heard a cat meowing right next to me when there was no cat.
Oh yeah.
Those are really fascinating. And again, I don't subscribe to the idea that those are all quote unquote ghosts or spirits of people who died. I think a lot of cases with these elementals that we've discussed, elemental entities or other types of what you could just, the best description would be a spiritual type of entity, for lack of a better term, because I'm not even sure I like the term spirit anymore. I think that there's just other entities with other levels of existence, and again, there's many different layers there. So spirit is just a little all too generic and encompassing. It could be a number of different things.
I do know this, though, that many times you'll see like a ghost and you'll like hear a voice and you think, oh, that's my Aunt Ruth. And it's like, it's not your Aunt Ruth. It's like there seems to be a level to, let's call them cosmic tricksters. So I always think like elementals could be at work here. Certainly there's a level of cosmic tricksterism to all of this, and my own experience as a ghost hunter was encountering some kind of an entity that actually would pose as a little girl with curls. Was not a little girl with curls because it could change form in front of you, And this is a little disconcerting when you're trying to get pictures or recordings, and you're not sure what you've got.
Well, when you mention little girl with curls, I automatically think of the Sally House haunting in Atchison, Kansas, with and that family started off seeing a little girl, what looked like a little girl, but as you mentioned, it sometimes they deceive. They put on either a voice or an image to lure you in, and some of these, what I refer to as etheric parasites, are trying to worm their way in to feed off your energy. And but even though there's such a dark side to all of this, I think that people need to remember there's also a very light side to all of this. There are probably angels trying to communicate with you. There are probably other entities, spirit guides trying to communicate with you. It could be a loved one who's trying to call for your attention, that they're trapped, in the woods 1,000 miles away. It could be your lost pet calling to you. It could be many things like that, and it's always good to be open, I think, to this. Not to seek them out necessarily. I no longer want to seek them out, but I do think we should be receptive to communications like this, because you never know. It could be very vital information that comes your way, and obviously it's directed to you. Mm-hmm. So many times people will have the experience of a loved one who recently died, and will come to them, speak to them, or appear in front of them, and they'll communicate something. It's awfully often it's like not verbal, but it'll be telepathic or something, and it'll be basically, I come to say goodbye, I love you. And it's very often true of people that this happens within like 3 days of a loved one passing. So, be open to that. Don't say, oh, that can't be. Like when my father appeared in front of the door and said, hi, son. My first thing was, you can't be here. You're dead. And he said, who told you that? So I think, I think it was kind of cute on his part, but I think it's also really true. When are we really dead? And also, when are we really alive? You're only alive if you're like paying attention. And again, not to get into the ufology aspect of it, but even Whitley Strieber in his books and with Communion and Onward started talking about the fact that the visitors, as he called them, seemed to be very much involved with our dead. He would see people aboard these crafts who he later found out had died months before. And people have, they seem to be very much involved with the spiritual side of things. Even this is a controversial for a lot of people, but Stan Romanek, and I'm not going to get into what happened with him, but he and people around him were receiving telephone calls from a computer-generated voice that they were able to actually track down the voice program called Audrey. And this voice would leave messages, either at telling them that they all needed to meet and come together, a big group of people, for either a channeling session with Stan, or to warn them about certain things. And multiple people would get the messages. And I've heard these recordings. And it's very, very interesting. And some of the information they come up with, it's like, how the heck did they do that? And they've tried to trace those phone calls, and they come up as blank, as if there was no phone call made.
Yeah. I received a series of 3 phone calls when I was working at the Theosophical headquarters in Wheaton, Illinois, years ago. And I just started on the job. And the phone rings, in summertime, and the phone rings, and it's a man who sounds very old and has a very thick East Indian accent. And he tells me he wants to take me on a trip to India in the fall. And he says that my lightning tours of India in the fall are wonderful. They change your life. And he keeps talking about it, and I keep saying, I can't go. You must have me mix up with somebody else. Who are you? Why are you calling me? He ignores everything I say. He just keeps talking about how wonderful it is. And then the call goes dead. And so I get like another one like this. And so I go across the street, because our publication building is across the street from the main building, where there's a switchboard operator. And, I'm up in this little office with this phone with an extension number. And I said, well, does this man identify himself when he calls and asks to speak to me? He said, nobody like that ever called to speak to you. He must have dialed you directly. And I said, how did he do that? I knew. Who does he? How would he know me? He must think I'm someone else. Or so, I next time I go on and talk about, why did you call me? He said, I am calling you, sir. You are the man that I want to go on this lightning tour of India. So, I try to find out who's playing this prank on me. And I'm asking everybody. Nobody knows anything about these calls. So, I get the third one, and he says, if you will not come to me on my lightning tour of India, sir, I will tell you something that will also change your life forever. He says, you must learn to meditate in the morning light beside running water. And he says that again. I said, okay, I could do that. And then click, it's gone. He never calls me again. So I get a blanket and I spread it out by the pond. There's a fountain in the back. And I start doing that. And it's really profound, moving in the light. He called it moving in the light, and living in the light and traveling in the light. And doggone, it had tremendous impact on me. And I was able to use it on people going through a hospice program, to help them actually walk from this world to the next. Doggone, if it wasn't great. You could actually move in the light. So the funny thing is, after the third call, I go downstairs to our bookstore, Quest Bookshop. And I talked to a friend of mine who runs a little shop and said, show me all of the books that you have from people in India that write about meditation. And she said, they're all in all the good stuff, she says, is back in that corner, meaning the good stuff, meaning the real sages, the real yogis. So I go back there, and there's a book that's face out on one of those little book stands. And I pick that up. A picture of an old dude on the front. So I flip it over and I start reading the back, and it says he was famous for his lightning tours of India. and then of course the book is about learning to meditate in the light beside running water. And at the bottom it says the date of his birth, and then it says the date of his death. The man died 2 years before I got a phone call. So the technique he taught me enabled me to help people moving through, this transition that we call death, which is just walking from this plane to another plane is all it is. And we did these exercises, which he called moving the light, which is you move from this plane to another plane. And you do this, by exercise of using your subtle energy body to do that. So when we went through, I would go with them so far that we would get beyond blue, the Buddhic plane, then we go to purple, and then I knew I was like the spirit realm. I didn't want to go there, so I would always back off and let them go. But people would be so happy to have these exercises. We'd wheel their beds, or angle their beds so that the light from the window, the natural light would shine on them, and then we'd bring a little teeny portable water fountain next to their desk, and we do these meditations, and I don't know, it seemed to make a real difference moving in the light.
And what fascinates me is he died 2 years before. You never knew him in life. Why did he choose you?
Why did he choose me? So finally, I thought, thank goodness he chose me, because later on, I got involved with this hospice program when I lived in Oregon, the Mount Hood Hospice. And doggone, I was able to actually adapt some of his teachings to these walks, through the different planes of reality. And it helped people, I think, when they were ready to transition. Because like I would always tell the lady who ran the hospice, I said, the people we're working with, they're going to walk out of here. And she said, nobody walks out of here. I said, they're going to walk out of here. I think that they were actually walking freely at the time of their life transition. I never felt sorry for any of those people. They're more free and liberated and more alive than I am.
Very true. I mean, you have to look at death is so many people are so scared of death. And I think, again, it's our cultural conditioning when, in fact, it's more of a transition to going home, back to our light bodies, back to a higher state of being. I've always looked at, we're here for this short period of time, which is a blink of an eye in the cosmic scheme of things, to learn certain lessons, to have certain experiences, and to learn from those experiences.
That's the material, aspect to us, our linear thinking. Everything has a beginning, a middle. I guess for you and I, this is the middle, and then later on it's the end. And then when it's the end, you're done. And it's like, I don't think that life is meant to be terminal. I don't think we're on a terminal course. And I worry about anybody who really thinks that, because I think that it goes on and on and on.
Absolutely.
Our consciousness will.
Absolutely. I mean, you can even look at the works of Dr. Raymond Moody and Brian Weiss, their books focused either on, past lives, which show, we come back and that existence continues, or the life in between lives, where when somebody dies and through hypnosis, they're able to describe their experiences as they're in between lifetimes on this physical plane. So it's all one big cycle, and I think we've been doing it for way longer than we realize.
I remember when I worked at a book publisher, and we had a retired psychologist come in one day with a book. He had a lot of notes and kind of a manuscript, and he wanted to know if it sounded interesting to him, because he'd never heard of anything quite like it. Well, actually, we were able to tell him about many people who had similar work, like Raymond Moody, for instance. And his name was Michael Newton. Michael Newton wrote The Journey of Souls, The Destiny of Souls.
I've read that.
Yeah. And he said, well, the doggonest thing is I would always, like every psychologist, I would get people to go, I say, go back, earlier. And some of these people went back to the life between lives. And they describe it was like to be just a speck of light between lives, and how they would get together with their soul groups, and how they would get together with their soul group leaders, and how they would come back and try it again, over and over and over, dare I say the word reincarnated. So, eventually he compiled many case studies in detail of people who had these experiences, and they knew each other. They were like soul groups, cluster groups that knew each other. And so I remember we were talking to him one day because, you want to see if somebody's like legit. He said, like, you have some documentation to back this all up, right, doctor? He said, who do you want to talk about? He had them all in case files, alphabetized by dates and names and ages, and oh my gosh. And it's like, this is real stuff. It goes on and on. I mean, this is just not a short course you're in. Yeah, pass, fail, folks. I mean, it's going to go on and on and on.
And it may not all necessarily go on and on here on Earth. It could be other planets, other planes of dimension, of existence. It's not just one journey, it's multiple journeys. And if you look at it from the point of that there is no time, that all of these lifetimes and experiences are all happening at once, which is a brain twisting concept for our linear way of thinking.
It's also comforting, don't you think, to think that that we could actually reincarnate on a distant planet. I mean, if we're really going to really max out this place, just totally trash it, just like rock stars, just trash the room and move. If we're going to leave this planet in rubble, well, then there are other places we could live. And you say, well, they don't sustain life. They'll sustain your consciousness just fine. We get so tied up to the fact that this is who I am, this body. No, this is just the vehicle you're in right now. We could very well end up living different lives in different places.
And in different dimensions or realities. I mean, you could have, I've heard stories of, let's say, if you want to talk about other planets not being able to sustain life. Okay, let's look at Venus. Venus is, as Carl Sagan once said, the one place in the solar system most like hell. 900 degree Fahrenheit, acid, sulfuric acid rain, crushing air pressure, greenhouse run amok. And yet I've heard of stories of people astral traveling or whatnot who go to Venus on a different dimension, and it's a paradise.
Sure.
It all depends. We can see everything only from one perspective. There's the concept that we're all living not only our past and future lives at the same time, we're living multiple versions of this lifetime at the same time.
I believe that. I am sort of conscious of another part of me that's living somewhere else, sometimes doing a lot better than I am, but that's okay. kind of root for that other guy. I think there are multiple possibilities, multiple versions of us, multiple realities, and multiple, if you think of like the Seth material, and Jane Roberts, and she talked about probable others, and wherever you've put your energy, your thought forms, you've manifested something that continues to grow, so I think that there are other aspects of you somewhere.
When I used to work with my old co-host, Irene, and sometimes she would tune in to some of these other realms. And there were times where she would talk about talking with me, and sometimes she'd be confused which version of me she was dealing with. There was a version of me that smoked. I don't smoke, never have.
Yeah.
And even Whitley Strieber had mentioned during some of his transcendental meditation sessions of seeing like 4 or 5 different realities of where he was living in various different, either in poverty or, success, with his wife, without his wife, and all happening simultaneously.
Yeah.
So
it makes sense. Things are not as one-dimensional as we think they are.
No, and this is why I love talking with people like yourself and exploring these and having these conversations and allowing other people to listen to this and just, some people, this might go way over their head. That's fine. A lot of this went way over my head for years. It took a long time for me to come into an acceptance of what is going on around me. And I'm still learning new things all the time. And sometimes I have a hard time dealing with it. But it's over time when it sinks in and my brain starts to process it, or my higher self starts talking to me and allowing me to look at these concepts and realize, while our meat sacks up here may be able to only process just so much, there's things that's beyond our comprehension, but that doesn't make them any less real.
Exactly so.
Well, fantastic. Well, Vaughn, we're coming up on the end of the program here. I want to thank you so much for coming on. I've really thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. Now, your two latest books, which, by the way, how many books have you written so far?
I don't know, about 16.
16.
Well, so some are coming out this fall.
Okay.
So we're going to do something totally different with Schiffer, our red book. It's called Red Feather. Red Feather has come up with a whole new concept called Ancient Mystery Series, and we're going to put them out like, believe it or not, they're going to be like scrolls, a modern version of the scroll. So we're gonna have those come out this fall. Can't wait.
Fascinating.
Can't wait to see what we do.
I can't wait to see that.
Yeah, but
okay,
it's a lot of fun, and most fun is coming on shows like yours.
Well, your last two books, which we've discussed tonight, Time Shifts, Experiences of Slipping into the Past and Future, and the newest one, Mysterious Messages from Beyond. Now, where can people get a hold of those books?
They're both available online with Barnes & Noble online or Amazon online, and they're both produced. Well, let's see. Well, they're produced by different publishers, but they're in bookstores, and they're out there.
Fantastic. Well, Vaughn, again, thank you so much for coming back on the program. I'm definitely going to have you back, especially when the new books come out, and we'll
be fun.
Continue this conversation.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you, and have a good evening.
Take care.
Well, that was Vaughn Braschler, and I want to thank him so much for coming on the show, and I want to thank you all for tuning in to my first show back. Now, those of you listening here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network, you can also catch, if you visit my Facebook page, there'll be a link to a video version of this show as well. So I want to thank you all. I'm going to try to be putting out another show in a couple of weeks. I'm lining up new guests as we go. I find I do a lot better with guests than me just sitting here rambling. I get tired of my own voice, and I'm sure you do too. So, but this is just the first in the series. I'm really looking forward to where we can go from here. If anybody has any questions, you can always reach out to me via Facebook. You can reach out to me via email. And for what it's worth, I am putting together an Astral Perceptions website that's going to not only feature these shows, but it's going to have articles, a blog that I'll be updating, links to different types. You can get readings, you can get a lot of different things. I'm still putting that together, so look for that coming in the near future. That will be astralperceptions.org. So until next time, I want to thank you all for tuning in. You have a great evening, afternoon, morning, whatever time of day it is for you, and we will catch you all next time. Have a good one. Bye-bye.